beeping coming from your mic somewhere?
What did you say?
I heard some like hum, like a beep, but you were muted, so I guess maybe it wasn't you. I don't know. Weird. Must have been
Now if
the
you hear it
Zoom
again.
sound. All right. Yeah. Yeah.
Reminder to sign in on the sheet if you haven't already. And then if people have things to talk about, put them on the list. Looks like we don't have Natalie this time, but I know she had some questions for you, Emily, about or I think there were just general questions yesterday about use cases for having as many states and process types or something, overriding the default versus overriding the command versus something.
I think she's supposed to join pretty soon.
I'll put that at the end of the agenda then, then we can, cool. And then before we kick things off, as a reminder, we're trying to figure out if we can close the GCP project. We deleted a cluster there. It didn't seem like it was being used for anything. And does anybody know I think we only have a couple people different than last time, but does anybody know if we're using the GCP project CNCF is paying a little bit for anything anymore?
I know we just moved release automation over so we can decommission Concourse, which is the big thing that was in there. There are a bunch of historical artifacts in the S3 buckets that I don't know if we want to delete all of that history. Also, I think has been used in the past to develop the Tecton template. I mean, you can do that locally with Kind, but I do think it's useful to have some infrastructure for that purpose. So I would say let's not, the question is, do we want to get rid of the account? I would say no, because it'll be harder to get it back if we come up with, like another platform integration that we needed to run test for or something like that.
Are the costs under the $100-something a month now that the CNCF said they'd pay?
I haven't looked at it in a while, but I can double check that. I feel like if we're under that amount, we should keep it around in case we want to add integration tests for Tecton or something.
Sounds good. I'll add a resolution there. We're still using GCS, is that right? You said S3, I assume you mean.
Yeah. I meant GCS. We're not putting new things there, but there's a history of old things there. I think we must be under, because I don't think we ever updated it to have a fallback sponsor.
Got it. Should we move on to asset packages?
Yeah.
Your headset's up.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, sorry. I thought it was.
Yeah. Doesn't work that well. So just computer audio for me. Okay, so this has changed a little bit since last time. I guess I can kind of talk more generally about it. That's a good place to start. But I guess let's kind of like go over the small changes because there wasn't that much extra stuff that needed to be added, and then go over any other questions. So since last time, I think that pretty much what's been added here is that Matt McNew wanted a lot of additional information about asset packages pushed into the builders and build packages. So basically kind of we're going to have this generic structure that it's a list of assets, URI to the asset package, its digest, some ID and version information, and then the layer diff IDs along with like the SHA of the asset that specific layer can contain. And all that's going to get kind of pushed around. So it's going to be present on both the builder and build packages. And I think that should kind of take care of most of his concerns around like image relocation and give him like all the information that he could possibly get about these things. I guess the second thing was that originally there was kind of a addition here to each asset package that had some additional paths that we would make artifacts available at but now because we're just using like archives, we're not letting people unzip their assets directly into a layer. We don't really need that anymore. And yeah, and I guess just some generic like naming changes. So like you can use any digest algorithm you want to package your assets in case you're not comfortable with using SHA-256. But yeah, I guess any questions on this, or should I just leave this up, let people take another look at it?
One thing I wanted to bring up is the framing. So we said we like assets versus dependencies. I think I like that direction. One thing I would change though is if you change it to assets, then I think we kind of lose this expectation that they might not be present. And for the use cases we're looking at, it's like we want platforms to be able to decide whether or not assets are available in some cases and other cases. And so I propose that we change the title from asset packages to asset cache packages instead. Does anybody feel strongly like it's we shouldn't set that expectation?
What was the rationale? One more time.
So
Sorry.
we expect Buildpacks to work without assets also, right? It's like to give you offline support. So if Ruby is available locally, the Buildpack doesn't have to go and reach out and download it, right? For instance, if we get this through as generic asset support, then if you read everything verbatim, it just looks like it's saying this is a way you can include assets with the Buildpack, and you might create a Buildpack that's wholly dependent on those assets, where the platform wouldn't be safe for a platform to say, I'm going to run a build without these assets. So you get into a situation where you'd need a copy of the build package that didn't have them in order to feel safe running up in a platform without them. And I think we don't want that probably. We want it so that build pack with assets in it should have the expectation of the platform can choose to run it with or without those assets.
Makes sense to me.
Or we should have a flag that lets it indicate that it needs them or something like that. But
yeah, I'm happy to make that renaming. It seems totally reasonable.
Are you suggesting in that case, Stephen, that the onus is on the build pack then, that if it can't find the asset, to figure out how to download and replicate it?
Or expect to just fail sometimes, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's right. I want it so that I'd like it if a platform can always choose, I'm going to do this build without this gigabyte of dependencies, even if that was distributed with the asset package. You don't have to rename it. It could just be some wording in there that says, hey, this is an expectation.
Yeah.
But it is an asset cache, though, is my view of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably just makes sense to go through, and if everything's going to be referred to as an asset cache, just make that kind of consistent. Okay. Guess I'm happy to move on if there's nothing more questions or discussion.
I just wanted to ask, the last time that I discussed this with you, there was some discussion about there also being a need for these kind of like meta asset packages to be able to say like, oh, I have, some particular assets, say for like Ruby and maybe, or like MRI, and then I have some subsets for say like JRuby. And I want to be able to like have those as separate asset packages, but then maybe have like a parent Ruby asset package that collectively includes both, say like MRI and JRuby. Do you have thoughts on that, or is that something you're planning on including in the proposal?
Yeah, so it is included in here. It's just this ability to like include an entire another asset package in one that you're making right here. So I think that one of the additions here is that anything in this array is just going to be downloaded. All of the assets and diff IDs are going to be added to the label. So you can kind of get this like nesting.
Okay. Cool. I didn't see that. I didn't know that had already been added.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of feedback on very small things, like I don't think it's necessary to say layer diff IDs. I think we should say diff IDs because they're always always layer blobs. They represent
Yeah.
whatever.
I think that's what everything else is called. Like if I inspect the labels on a build package or builder, that's like the term that we use.
It says layer diff IDs everywhere.
Yeah, it does.
It's weird, but okay.
Yeah.
No change it, I guess.
Okay, well, I'd love any of that feedback. But, right.
There was a question about ID and version.
Yes.
Currently at the top level, we define the package by a digest, an ID, a version, and it says URI, but it probably is like supposed to be a ref or something. I'm looking at the build package label, but I think it's the same stuff there. Yeah.
Yeah.
The ID and version are necessary, or like I think Nick New wanted the ID and version there, so there's some identifier for this thing separately, but it seems like you could just use the layered diff IDs of all of them and just pick the layered diff IDs that you need or something like that. There's maybe a conversation. Does anybody else have use cases for ID and version here?
I thought McNew wanted it so that you can like print it in log statements. So you're not like missing this diff ID. Rather, you could say, I can't find the blog for this asset.
Do we need a version and a digest? Or does he just need an ID?
I don't know. I guess with the, if you had all the information, you could recreate asset layers if you didn't have access to the asset cache, but I'm just, coming up with reasons at this point.
I
I
think
feel like in general, we shouldn't have the URI because maybe that's not something, like that's something, a place where we were putting it together at that time. But it's not guaranteed that whatever we use there is something that we expect other people to be able to access, right?
It could be a way to find it from the build package, no matter where you are, right? It's like without that information coming from the build package to get to the asset package, you know what digest is, but you have no idea where it could be. It could be just like a canonical location where if you don't have it, you could go here to get it. That's why I kind of like the idea of having the ref and the build package thing. I was more wondering if maybe ID and version should be name or something like that, just like descriptor so that people you can call it something in log output if we don't have if it's not really a unique ID that's being enforced, that it's not other things, right? It seems like we're using the digest for that. I think maybe just a name for both those fields together would be sufficient.
Yeah, the kind of reason I wanted to have thought about having two was just that there's this kind of linkage to like build packs. We want to have this linkage, and if we can like give an ID and a version that, especially probably for the Paketo side, that's like closely related to the associated build pack release, just like a little bit easier to figure out what you have sitting in front of you.
I think you wouldn't want to version it the same as the build pack though, right? Because the build pack may change without the dependencies changing, and then you end up with slightly offset versions, which are like worse than, it's like two versions that look similar but aren't, unless we have a use for that ID and version there, like I think just some descriptor so they understand this is the Paketo Ruby asset package, could suffice.
What if someday we wanted to have like assets in a registry, that kind of thing, and you wanted to be able to look it up by ID and version? Like maybe we actually want to push people to use IDs as we move to this format because it opens up opportunities later.
Wouldn't it be build packs in the registry though, and then they reference assets? Like, are the assets in something we want people to consume independently outside of the build pack context?
Well, right now we're saying like a build pack to get around the fact that an asset isn't in a registry. A build pack contains like a reference for a place they might want to look up an asset, but then maybe later we have a different place they might want to look it up. But if instead it just had the ID and version coordinates, then you'd know that you need to configure whatever system you're using to have a registry.
If we do the ID inversion thing, we should define what the allowed characters are and if there's namespacing and everything up front.
That makes sense.
If the reason part of the reason I was suggesting name is because for Buildpacks we have a name, an ID, and a version, and so if we start with name as just a log descriptor, then we can add an ID inversion later if we need it, and everything still works together. It's purely additive change.
Yeah, I like that.
So you're suggesting name instead of ID?
Yeah, so that way we get ID version later if we need to, and there's no conflicts.
And name is just human readable string, so like anything is allowed, right? Like you could put the ID there, but you could also put whatever you want, right?
Yeah, Heroku offline Ruby versions or something. Just whatever's descriptive that you'd want a user to know. This is what that is.
Right. Right. Like you could put potentially even like the build whatever thing when you run like JRuby-V or something, right?
It's like the name field in the build pack toml right now.
I definitely liked Emily's idea of the registry down the line as a thing. I can imagine potentially a service that, given this file and a build package, it could construct a build package based on the assets from said registry.
The assets don't go inside the build package, though. I guess it could construct it with the reference to the thing. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
Some future magical world that we keep talking about.
Yeah.
So do we never reference ID anywhere else then? That's like the basic conclusion we came to, right?
Yeah, I think the only other place is when you're actually making the asset. Okay, all right. Yeah, I guess the last thing is definitely the point you had, Stephen, about this potentially being a little bit awkward, because you should probably leave it up to the platform to actually figure out how to resolve what this is pointing to, right?
My point was actually just to be ref instead of URI, because it's not a URI, it's a ref to an image. As long as you have that, really, you don't even need to digest. As long as you have those layer diff IDs in there, the platform, those are what the platform can use to find the parts of the build package that it needs, right? And so you can ignore that ref. It's just, I think the ref is useful in the build package label so that if you ever find a build package somewhere, right, you want to grab the associated asset packages, there is a place somewhere where they may be, even if it's not a place that you're actually getting them from when you do your build, right? Because you're in an offline environment.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I've been thinking about recently around our reliance on these diff IDs is that we have to have some way to take huge asset packages that have too many layers and squash some of them down into one layer, right? And so suddenly we can have diff IDs, I think, that change. And so at the end of the day, like the most reliable thing that you can use to figure out if you actually have an asset available to you is the digest, because it's just kind of like,
I see there that the individual layer diff ID has multiple assets under it. I thought that was to account for that, so that in the future, if we had to squash them together when we built the package because it was too many things, you could just collect all the different assets inside of that one diff ID into the list. I thought that was an attempt to fix the problem already in there.
I think we just having like a one-to-many mapping. But once I claim that a layer has, I've added assets into a layer, won't that change this diff ID?
I think it's describing the assets that are in that layer. So if you change the number, if you change the assets, you would change the layer. I think to do what Steven's describing, which is not how I originally read this, but now that I'm looking closely, I see that that makes sense. But the ID inversion, I thought we were talking about the ID inversion of an asset, but I guess we're talking about the ID inversion of a, what are they referencing?
Yeah, so these like top level things are definitely just the ID and the version of the asset package.
The
itself.
asset package.
Yes.
Because an asset package can have multiple assets in it.
Yeah.
I guess I take back what I said before about ID inversion of assets in a registry. I was thinking about ID inversion of an asset, not an asset package. I feel like once it's in a registry, the package part isn't relevant anymore.
What do you mean by that, Emily? Or maybe I'm just not tracking.
I guess if I can imagine a world where I want to fetch a asset by ID inversion out of a registry, but I don't know why I'd be referring to an asset package at that point. Does that make sense? When we're referring to a package, I might as well refer to the image. Don't worry about it. That's okay if that doesn't make sense, because I was the one saying it made sense in the registry, right? I just want to take that back because it doesn't make sense to me in my own head anymore.
So you want an ID version of, say, Java 11 in this example instead of Java assets?
Yeah, that's an ID version I could imagine using in different situations.
Because you want to pull, you want to be able to rebuild this package, or you want to reference it in a build pack?
Yeah. Like if I'm creating a builder and I said like offline, use offline assets, particular ones. So that I can talk about which things in particular I want to pull in, which ones I don't.
So you would want to pull in, say, like Java 11, but not Java 13 or something?
Yeah. If I know that like 90% of my applications use Java 11 and only a couple are still in Java 8, I might say it's worth it to me for those Java 8 builds to be slower and download, but I'd like to cache Java 11 for the bulk of the apps in the builder image, something like that.
Yeah, I think you have that. You do definitely have that as an option, but it's just like, yeah, this definitely is not like used data. It's just kind of like metadata right now.
I'll go back to, if we take out all the IDs and versions and only put names in places where we're sure we need some log output to describe the thing, then as soon as we need those things in the future, we can say, let's add those fields back and people can use them for things.
Is it problematic for that other, the top, well, I guess this label is generated from that TOML file, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
So if we put name there, it would be the same.
Yep.
The reason, coming back to the layer squashing problem, so layer squashing is only a problem each time you decide you need to generate an image, right? And so if you generate the asset package, you're going to have a fixed set of diff IDs that you can reference in the build package, right? And at that point, there's no point where you'd want to do squash. You've already squashed. You already put the assets together because it's already a list, right, per diff ID. And then the next time you'd want to construct an image is when you're maybe constructing a builder. But at that point, you can use the build package metadata, use the asset metadata, join everything together. And then if you had to regenerate diff IDs, you could regenerate them for whatever you want to put on the builder about the asset package, but it's already resolved at that point. So I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think as long as you do what you did there, where you have multiple assets per diff ID, right, then we're always safe.
Yeah, so the case that I was thinking about is you have a builder already, and one of the build packages in your builder references an asset image that's not in the builder, right? So like you've partially vendored your builder, just like what Emily was talking about earlier, where you just have Java 11 present. And there's a ton of layers, so you've squished some of them down. If another, let's say I'm doing a Java 8 build now, or another build, how do I determine if the asset layer diff IDs are already in my builder image, or if I have to reach out and download something new? So
We could track the old ones on the builder metadata. Sorry, Emily, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just wondering, like, when you say, how do I determine who's I and when is I making the determination?
yeah. How does the platform figure out? So one of the things that this outlines is like, oh, the platform should have the ability to like pull asset packages from somewhere if it wants to, right? It can figure out how, but it should have that ability. So the platform needs to figure out, oh, I have a builder, it has some asset, it has some set of assets in it, but some of them have been squished together now. How do I compare those like squished layers to assets in this image that I might want to pull, right?
This is something I was thinking about. It sort of goes against what Stephen was saying about not having IDs. I was wondering if we wanted to have the lookup table be like you're looking up assets by ID. And then within that, you find out what diff ID describes the layer that your asset is in. And like maybe the two different assets end up listing the same diff ID. But is that like a more useful way to read the data? I think in either case, you could do what you wanted though, because it's all there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would totally work. Anything where you have like all of the leaf like nodes in an asset package kind of like labeled in a very specific way or in a unique way lets you just like construct a set and say, oh, everything I want is here, or I'm missing something. But I think we can get around this by just using like digests. As long as you can say they're unique, you should be okay. But
concretely, this means flipping around that data structure in the build package metadata so that, just from my understanding, so the top level things are the SHAs of the very most inner digest, the SHA of the artifact itself. Is that right? And then have those point out to diff IDs. Is that, Emily, am I understanding right?
yeah. I think
I'm not sure if I really want to do it. I'm just throwing it out there. Like, is that a more useful way to process the data?
I think you can figure everything out with like stuff that's already here. It just means that the like concrete thing that you really end up relying on isn't so much a layer diff ID because of this problem. It ends up being digests of the like assets you want to include.
I think I like Emily's suggested structuring of the data a little bit better, I think, because carrying around that digest as the thing that Buildpacks say they depend on seems safer because it does, even though I don't think we'll necessarily have diff ID problems, it gives you a permanent reference to exactly that artifact when the Buildpacks need it, as long as you're willing to decorate everything with all of those with all of the individual asset digests and not layer diff ID digests, if that makes sense. Which is a question because we have a lot of those in some places, but I think it's probably the safer thing to do. It avoids this multi-level problem, right? And then pushes how the data is structured into the details of each sort of asset.
Yeah. Okay, I can definitely do that.
That might break something. That might not work for some reason. Just it sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
So your question of like when you're constructing a builder, what if you already have a builder and you want to construct more? I'd say defer that until you have that problem, because in many cases you probably would just regenerate your builder from your build packages, if that makes sense. It's like that that situation is like when you already have a builder, right? And you're trying to extend the builder with more things that weren't included in it originally. I don't know if I have examples of platforms where they would need that functionality.
And wouldn't just making the ephemeral builder be a case where we would need to, we might run into this problem, right?
From an existing builder, right?
Yeah.
Like in Pact, you're saying.
Yeah.
Do we expect partially vendored builders to be a thing in Pact?
For a first pass, I expect create builder to be able to make me a partially vendored builder. But I don't expect to be able to change my mind about what should and shouldn't be vendored on a pack build. That's sort of my first pass.
Yeah. Because like the build pack is going to reach out to get the asset anyways. If you have an online builder, it's like, do we need two kinds of online builder? An online builder that'll pull all the required assets for a build pack ahead of time. If it's an asset cache, at that point, don't you just want it to reach out for the one asset that you actually need during your build with the detection logic in there to refine that down to exactly one asset that you need? That seems better.
Yeah.
So I would not worry about that case.
Okay. It does give like some of the users something that they have kind of been asking for, which is if I have this behavior and I do one build with Java 11, and then I do another build with the same builder and make a totally different image, suddenly that asset cache has been pulled down and I can potentially reuse it on the second build, right? So it does kind of like, in a weird way, give you access to something on a second build that you didn't on the first, even though it's just the same thing. But yeah, I agree, probably not in the first round of writing this out.
If it's going to be that dynamic, I feel like you should not be pulling all the assets ahead of time. The build pack should just be downloading the asset it needs, right? Because like the problem is that the build pack can always download less than the platform can, because it can know what it needs during the build. There could be optional build packs that don't run, that therefore don't pull the dependency. But if you try to do anything static ahead of time in trying to figure out what you need and what you don't need, it's going to be less efficient, because you're going to download more stuff. And so it's like, it kind of makes sense. Like if you have room to, fill up all these asset packages, if it's not expensive to have all those present, then do it. Otherwise, if you're building on the edge somewhere, you really don't have the transfer to copy all the asset packages there right now, then just do the build and let the build pack be smart about it. And you'll get the caching effect on rebuilds, right?
Yeah. Okay, all right. I'll think about flipping this around, and would love some of the kind of like naming and other concerns that you have, Stephen, in your head.
Layer diff IDs was the main thing, and if we're using that everywhere, then certainly don't change it, or like it shouldn't be different than other places.
Don't change it until we fix all the labels, and then change the heck out of it.
URI to ref, that was the other thing.
Okay.
It's not a URI.
I'm concerned that if this is necessarily the URI that you created the package from, that it's not always something that we want to be for the asset URI. It's not the asset package, not necessarily something we want to be sharing, especially like you could create it from a local tar or something private on your registry.
I agree with that.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the feedback. I guess before I take up all of the time, so I think there's some other stuff on the agenda.
Yeah. I think process types was next. I think we have, or Natalie, there's some discussion yesterday about process types where I'll just try to summarize at a high level. It's like we think we have 5 states. It's like you can override a command, can override another command. Should you be able to say like, don't override a web process if there's already a web process, or don't override a worker process if there's already a worker process. And there's also expressing this process type should be the default process type, like with a key attached to that particular process type. be it web or worker or whatever, this is the one that should do that. And then there's maybe another set of state, another single state or something that's in the case that you've specified that you want this process type to be the default process type, and something else has specified that this process type wants to be the default process type. Should we have a flag that says, yes, override that versus no, don't override that, right? So you could express this with 3 Booleans, where one combination of the 3 Booleans is not allowed, or doesn't mean anything different from another one. Or we could use a series of names, or and then Simon brought up an idea that was we could use integers or some, you know, like 5 states essentially, to just purely express priority instead of that whole system, and you could get roughly the same outcome, because you could still, for any given process type, you could say this is really important and it always ends up doing that, or you could say this is not very important and it never does. And then, you know, how the states are relative to each other actually give you the same, roughly the same gradient as those 5 states, without having to worry about the semantic meaning of each flag. Did I summarize that well from last time? So I think the question in the end we had, Emily, for you was, do you have, before we start thinking about which interesting UX we want to use to express the 5 states, do we have a need for all 3 of those toggles?
I guess the obvious one to drop would be this is a default if there is none. But I'm not confident I want to be the default, that state, right?
Right. Override of the default as opposed to override of the name.
I feel like we could drop that now that we have the reason I wanted it there in the first place was so that some of the stuff is less order dependent. Like if I wanted to add a build pack to my build that I'm consuming a bunch of other build packs, but I want to add one to every group that's like, if nothing else is going on here, should be the default process. I don't have to think about exactly, I guess it could just go in the beginning if you really wanted to do it that way. But I feel like we're leaning into the order dependence now with the override, and therefore that motivation doesn't feel as important to me. Now we've said that the order dependent part of this is okay, and we're going to structure more around it. And I feel like we just take it out.
To summarize, there'd be 2 Booleans, like a override yes or no and default yes or no on each process type.
Yeah.
Natalie, any thoughts?
So override would specifically be talking about whether you override another process type, the same process type. It's like I'm web. I want to yes or no override another web.
Yeah, and then default always wins. If your process is valid and it's a default, it gets to be the default.
That's last wins.
Yeah.
So
like if you go ahead.
As an edge case, if you had a worker process that was a default worker process set in a previous build pack, and you set override equals false, default equals true on your web process in a subsequent build pack, the override would be meaningless because there's no existing web process. And you would, even though you didn't set override to true, you would change the default from the worker process to the web process, and that's expected behavior.
Yeah.
I like that. If it has enough functionality for people. Sorry, Natalie, I think I interrupted you.
Although I think what's interesting about this solution is that in some ways, override ends up being a feature we're adding that has nothing to do with defaulting, which was the original point of this RFC, right? Like we think we introduced it to solve some problem that was introduced by defaulting, but I don't think it solves that problem anymore because it's orthogonal to it. It's about, can I override web or not? Which is a problem that people already have, and we always say last wins.
I think it only came in because of the edge case that Jesse brought up, right? It's like, what do you do if you set something, like if I set web to default and then some other Buildpack sets some other process to default, like worker or whatever, but like another Buildpack ready defined worker, like, does that change it? I think it's just like the mixing of redefining process types and setting defaults.
But have
Is
we,
why we're talking about it again. And I think that's when we decided from last week to pull this into the process table explicitly versus it being a standalone table in that launch toml, if I recall correctly.
yeah, I'm not sure there's a new problem introduced by default that the override solves, but I like the override, so we can couple it all together.
If you have a default process and something after, or if you define a process and there's a default process defined in the previous build pack, and you would override that process and therefore get rid of the default with a non-default process, that could be bad. So you might want to say that you shouldn't override a process at all, because that way at least you have a default process type in the end. It's like if you're not defining default, you may also want to be override false so that you don't clobber a default process if it's there. And so that's a theoretical interplay I can think of between the two. Is that, I don't know, Terrence, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think that's basically it, because you kind of have to have knowledge that there is a default in order to not clobber the default before you.
Yeah.
It's okay. Like, I think it's all right personally if we just like don't have a default in that situation, but it does mean that Buildpacks may be a little too brittle to like, you know, interplay in that way.
Or confused.
Yeah, yeah.
So even though we're, sorry.
I think it's weird that you would override the process. I guess now you wouldn't over.
Well, I guess pre the override flag, right? The functionality would be I defined process B and process A, right? And another build pack also define these process types. And since I'm later in the cycle, override by default is true, or not by default. Like the way it's written now is override equals true all the time, right?
Now you've blown away the default. Okay,
Yeah.
but have we fixed that? Because I guess if override is false by default, now you just don't get your process. So you do get the old default, but is that actually better overall?
Well, somebody already said they have a perfectly fine web process and it should be the default. So probably
But from
better
a
use that
build
one if you
pack
don't
trying to
think yours should
contribute
be.
this process for a reason, it's weird that like sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't based on whether it's default.
You said maybe we should provide a way to reference a process type that a particular build, like not really override anything, just make these flags point you to thing if you're not specifying the fully qualified namespace.
Right.
I think what we have works fine, but I think override needs to default to true, right? Which means we need to rename it so it's the opposite.
You mean override?
Yeah.
Steven had this suggestion yesterday.
I was going to bring that up too. After we figured out if we're okay with two flags, the override one should actually be not override. Default is okay though. I think default should be false by default.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, it'd be really nice to have that schema that could validate this toml file, that you can only have one of these things set to true. The I guess I'm just trying to think of like these are all great theoretical use cases, but I'm just trying to map it to like a real world use case of like something in practice where you'd actually want to redefine a thing, but not set the default if it got overridden. That's what we were saying we wanted to happen in that weird case.
Speaking as someone who writes build packs that override each other's processes all the time right now, as soon as default is a flag, I think we're going to change them all so they never override each other's processes. Because the only reason we do it at all is to get a default process. So realistically, none of these edge cases matter to me as a build pack author.
I talked to the Potato folks yesterday, and they said they never, like, their build packs are super modular and they don't combine them together in ways where you'd end up with 2 web processes in the same build anyways. So they don't have a use for either of the features.
I mean, I definitely have a use case that we've seen at Heroku. I think this definitely comes up more when you have ecosystem of build packs versus if you are a company that has build packs where you can coordinate it. It's just like, okay, well, as a company, just make sure your stuff works together. If that was like
Yeah,
a
we're used to
restriction, right?
seeing arbitrary combinations and even arbitrary orders if it's the same build packs. So we've gotten into situations with things other than process types where people had PHP before Node or Node before PHP, and we got unexpected results because something was overridden.
Doesn't that happen because the name is meaningful in whether or not it's the default, right? Like people are fighting to set web because web's what's going to run. But
No,
if you could set your default, it'd be different.
I mean, maybe like, but then you still have to coordinate to make them different names. I guess like the use case I'm thinking of is like if I have a say like I don't know, React app, right? That just uses the node build pack initially, right? Or some combination that becomes the node build pack, right? And I want to serve those assets, like in development, I use Node to serve, and my initial deployment will just use the Node web server. I'll run, Node start or npm start, and it runs my web server, and just, not very optimally, but Node has a web server that can just serve out these static assets, right? And does the right thing like it does locally. And then maybe down the line, it's like, oh, I learned like I need to add some like a proxy or some front end thing in front, like an Nginx or Apache, right? For performance. I think this is like a common pattern I've seen, and like, like it's also going to set a thing similar to web. For sure, you could call it something else, but there's not. I don't think it's a particularly great reason necessary to name it something differently, right?
I think
if you named it something differently, then also at runtime you'd have an option of running one or the other, right?
I think this is why either last when's or user selects the name of the process type they want to run from the build pack are attractive, because that, like, you're expressing a situation where you don't want the build pack to have a say in what happens because the build pack doesn't know how it's being used, right? If it's going to be first or last or whatever, right? Like it doesn't know if it should override the thing. And so it's a decision that can be put on the user. And a way to do that is either tell the user about order and the last things will override the earlier things, and they can use the order of the build packs to control that, or be okay with really every single process type that's contributed is accessible and runnable to the user.
I like the latter. I like the last thing you said, like them all being namespace, but then maybe default is the last build pack that ran gets to pick the default that had a default true. And that kind of lets you at either end set default as like the first build pack that, and if no one else has build pack, then you can run all the namespaced webs of Ruby/web, Nginx/web. Yeah. Anyway, I like that the best.
Yeah, I think in V2 land we use basically the thing that no one else likes to use, the bin release script. is we can set basically process types in there, and then later build packs can override them. And that's how we've solved that use case.
Is it the same as what we're doing with in V3 with the writing the file dynamically during build time?
Yeah.
Buildpack still doesn't know its context in relation to buildpacks.
But does it have to, I guess, is the question.
I think it can't, and the user needs to make the decision either by order or by selecting it by name.
I feel like, well, it would be nice to be able to access every buildpack namespace. Right now we can't do that. I think there's a win here to get just by setting a process to default. I think some of the stuff we've done to make it more complicated came out of a time when the default process wasn't, like default Boolean wasn't a field of the process itself, right? It's because you could reference a process, but then what that was referencing could change. I feel like if we just say, you can only make it default if you described the process, and we put a default Boolean in the process, and last wins, this would already be a net new good feature. And then override could be another net new good feature. I don't even see them having to come together.
A separate RFC. And we don't have to deal with the figuring out a word for override that means the opposite of override.
Yeah.
So just the one flag is the suggestion.
Do we want to talk about, or is it worth thinking about Simon's solution instead?
Does Emily know Simon's solution?
The number thing. Part of me, like, I need to spend some time like sitting with it. Part of me wants to react against it as being too complicated. Like, I don't have to think that hard about which of my processes are going to win. As my knee-jerk reaction.
Gives you kind of infinite configurability with just one.
Which is too much. I don't know if I want infinite configurability.
Yeah.
I want like certain things to be not infinitely configurable. So then I ask like, I can't do what I want. And then I come up with a simpler, better way to solve it, which is, I should just give this process a different name and set it to the default.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Just on the more granular configurability of the default, what's the reason we turned away from the suggestion to have default instead of being a Boolean be sort of like 3 different things? You know, one is, yes, I'd like it to be the default. The other one would be if not present, or, you know, fall back to this as the default. And then the last one be, you know, no designation, I guess. That seems to provide just a little bit of extra control without really making things that complicated.
I think it's the existence of that couples this to override. Because if you say, I'm defining web, I'd like it to be the default, but only if there's no default. That's a confusing thing to express if the previous default was a different web process, right? Because then you're overriding it, even though you said you didn't want to. That's sort of why it gets confusing in my mind. I think my overall take would be we should drop it for simplicity. Not because it's inherently a bad idea, but because we keep having these complicated conversations, which makes me think maybe it's too complicated. And we should just leave it out, and then we can introduce it later if people feel like they need an out from the order.
Does anybody know of use cases for additional functionality aside from a per process default flag that's namespaced to that process such that it's meaningless if that process is overridden? Does anybody remember or have real world use cases for the override functionality or kind of any of the other case combinations we talked about in the past.
Is that like when a build pack defines a default but doesn't define that process?
The only function I'm talking, in the simplest case, we just implement a single default equals true or false Boolean on each individual process, such that it means this should be the default, and if another process overrides it with a process of the same name, then that information is lost. It can never be the default because another thing overrode it, and that thing may or may not be the default, but it's irrelevant, if that makes sense.
Every case I can think of for that, I could just as easily put that build pack at the beginning of my order. And therefore, being able to bake that in doesn't matter as much.
The confusing part about the order, like the disadvantage of using the order for everything is that the primary use of order, and like where I'm hoping we can avoid using order in too many different unrelated places, is the primary usage of it is a build time dependency between X and Y, right? Like when you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to design my build and I have a series of stages. For the user, it's easiest if the only thing they have to worry about order-wise is thinking, this, I need node to be able to run npm. Therefore, I'm going to put node before npm, right? And if we keep having the order mean a whole bunch of different things, then suddenly you get conflicts between, well, node is supposed to be npm, but actually I wanted node start command, not npm start command, right? So that'd be my caution against, or that might be why a override Boolean might be better in the future, or namespacing, or having process types that never override each other, or something like that. But I don't think that prevents us from adding this default functionality right now.
Well, it leans into that even more though, right? Which goes against what you're trying to do here, Stephen.
The override would. The override would go against, or well,
just the default flag, right? Because we're saying last wins. If you have two process types that say default from two different build packs, there
We
has to be a
already
way
say
to
the
resolve.
last wins when
Right.
the default's web, right? So I don't think any of the problems that this makes them worse.
I think it only matters if you had Riff and you were overriding web or something like that. Like they have web and it's not default today, and you have web and it's not default today. Everything today boots up with web being the default from pack, right? When you build it from pack. Tomorrow, if Riff updates it with default equals true, because they're like, yeah, I always want to have this as a process type. Well, now my image no longer produces an image with the default. But I think that's an edge case. That's probably okay. But
that kind of brings up one of the last outstanding questions, which is, what pack should continue to do, because obviously we can introduce this functionality into the API, but there's no guarantee that Buildpacks are going to immediately start declaring default processes. And then if pack decides, I'm not going to override what Buildpacks are doing, let's stop passing through default web, you're going to get a lot of images that just aren't runnable by default. And that seems like a bad experience.
It is a conundrum.
it's a weird chicken and egg thing. Because if pack wasn't already doing this, then it would be maybe a little bit more clear. But since it's always going to be passing, or right now it's passing web, it makes this a weird choice.
I think an interesting play with this, not sure it solves the problem with the migration, because this would still require education before we took away pack. But because the time when you want pack to stop passing web is when your whole ecosystem of Buildpacks has agreed to move over to deciding their own defaults, right? But because you can set default process type with a environment variable, like a builder could bake in default process type web. Like the Paketo builder could do that now. And then pack could take it out and everything would still work. And then later when all the Buildpacks move over, you can drop it. And that was sort of put it in control of the Buildpack authors in an ecosystem for when they're ready to make that move.
I guess the invar has precedence, right? So if I set web, whichever last web wins will be the default at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
So that means you can't really, you'd have to wait for all your build packs to move over to this new structure if you ever pass that invar in. So you can't really bake it into your builder without, it's like all or nothing.
It's sort of like a big bang thing, which isn't great. Same with pack as well, right? You can't stop setting web. I feel like as Buildpack authors, what we'll have to do is keep updating web to be the thing we want to be default and keep adding processes that we set default so that eventually we just drop web entirely.
Unless the builder can communicate like a version to pack so that it doesn't send it in or something.
The web discussions, is that slightly out of scope of this RFC, or are we tackling migration as part of that?
I think because we want pack users to be able to use this feature, it definitely touches on this, but we could call it out of scope. But it's the conversation we want to have afterwards, right?
It's much more pack specific than the lifecycle implementation though, right? Or am I wrong on that front?
Well, we can make all of these changes in the lifecycle based on this RFC. And if the platform you're using is pack, you would never even know we made those changes unless pack stops passing web. The feature doesn't exist to pack users until that point in time.
Because if pack passes web,
Pack wins.
It doesn't matter what happens to all this new config we're talking about introducing.
is there a difference between platform versus user passing a process type?
I don't think so. Not from the life cycles perspective.
Should there be?
And is it CNB process or is it CNB like, we need like CNB default if not present process? Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we need the default if not present. Well,
Maybe I can try to capture some of this in the on the conversation under that comment. Get Javier to weigh in.
You know, the flag name is not process type, it's default process type. We could reinterpret it to be not taking precedent, but then we would need a way to specify one that takes precedence.
Cool. Well, like Emily said, we're over, and
Yeah.
I think we should cut it instead of continuing the conversation.
See you.